Our scripture text this morning comes from Matthew chapter 6. We continue Jesus' words from the Sermon on the Mount. Don't hoard treasure down here when it gets eaten by moths and corroded by rust, or worse, stolen by burglars. Stockpile treasure in heaven, where it's safe from moth and rust and burglars. It's obvious, isn't it? The place where your treasure is the place you will most want to be and end up being. Your eyes are windows into your body. If you open your eyes wide in wonder and belief, your body fills up with light. If you live squinty-eyed in greed and distrust, your body is a dank cellar. If you pull the blinds on your windows, what a dark life you will have. You can't worship two gods at once. Loving one God, you'll end up hating the other. Adoration of one feeds contempt for the other. You can't worship God and money both. If you decide for God, living a life of God worship, it follows that you don't fuss about what's on the table at mealtimes, or whether the clothes in your closet are in fashion. There's far more to your life than the food you put into your stomach, more to your outward appearance than the clothes you hang on your body. Look at the birds, free and unfettered, not tied down to a job description, careless in the care of God. And you count far more to God than birds. Has anyone by fussing in front of the mirror ever gotten taller by so much as an inch? All this time and money wasted on fashion, do you think it makes that much difference? Instead of looking at the fashions, walk out into the fields and look at the wildflowers. They never primp or shop, but you? There you go. I was like, something's wrong with that sentence. But have you ever seen color and design quite like it? The 10 best dressed men and women in the country look shabby alongside them. If God gives such attention to the appearance of wildflowers, most of which are never even seen, don't you think God will attend to you, take pride in you, do God's best for you? What I'm trying to do here is to get you to relax, to not be so preoccupied with getting, so you can respond to God's giving. People who don't know God and the way God works fuss over these things, but you know both God and how God works. Steep your life in God reality, God initiative, God provisions. Don't worry about missing out. You'll find all your everyday human concerns will be met. Give your entire attention to what God is doing right now, and don't get worked up about what may or may not happen tomorrow. God will help you deal with whatever hard things come up when the time comes. And there our reading ends. Let's consider how we apply these words of Scripture to our lives this morning. I want to take you on a treasure hunt this morning. Jesus continues the words of the Sermon on the Mount, really revolutionary words to the people of his day, and I believe revolutionary words for us as well. Jesus, as Carla mentioned to us last week in her sermon, took us through how we talk to God in prayer, what we give to God in our offerings, and how we show our spiritual discipline through fasting and the things that we give up in life. And now Jesus' words move into that dreaded thing that we do not want Jesus, God, or anyone else to ever talk to us about, our treasures. Our treasures. We do not like people telling us what to do with our treasures, do we? And yet, you come to church, and the dreaded thing at church is that the pastor will stand up and talk to you about money, right? Right, yeah, exactly, right. Well, you're in luck. I'm not going to talk too much about money this morning. I am going to talk about how we look at money and all kinds of other things in the world. Our sermon series right now is Awaken, and looking at and opening up to Jesus' radical vision for our lives, how Jesus' vision for our world can free us to live a new kind of life, a life that we have not even dreamed of before. Now, this treasure hunt is very important in this journey of awakening, because this treasure hunt for us can either be one in our lives that is full of hoarding, as Jesus talks about at the beginning of this scripture text, where we hoard things to ourselves, believing our world is one of wants and need and lack of, if that makes sense. We can see our world and look at it and go, ooh, there's not enough this, and I need that, and I want this, and I deserve these things. And that is a whole paradigm of thought of looking at our world. Or as Jesus says, and Jesus commends to us, we can see the world with God eyes, with wonder, and seeing the good and the plenty and the blessings that exist in everything that we encounter in life. That we can believe, that we choose to see God at work in our world and in our lives. And so we can be hoarding and not seeing enough in the world, not seeing God's blessings at work there. Or on the other side, we can see God in all sorts of things in our lives. And so will we be hoarding of our treasures, or will we see the generosity of God in our world? And it all comes down to, how do we choose to see? Because there are amazing things happening in our lives. Even in the midst of the worst circumstances, we begin to look around, we begin to walk around, and we see beauty. We see love. We see grace and goodness. We look down at a child, an itty-bitty child, and we see God in that child. We walk outside into nature, into the mountains, and we see the beauty of trees, the beauty of the sky, the beauty of the waters. We get on our bicycles, we get into our gardens, we do all the things that we consider to be hobbies, and we see God's goodness in those things. We look at Peyton Manning and know God's blessing has come to Denver. Right? I mean, God is working all over the place. If we choose to look at our world that way. But we can choose to look at the world in that hoarding way as well, that negative way, with squinty eyes, as our particular translation says. Eyes that only see the world through greed, eyes that only see the world through distrust, eyes that tend to be skeptical of other people and of the blessings that do come into our lives. And as we begin to have that blurred vision of God's world, it changes us, it morphs us, it deforms us in the creatures that we do not want to be. And we all know how this works in our lives. The more that we see the negative out there, the more negative we tend to become, right? And it begins to add stress and anxiety, and our souls get heavy. Our minds begin to fill with so much anxiety. And slowly, day by day, not only does it shape our souls and our hearts and our minds, our mental capacity, it literally begins to deform our bodies. When we have negative thoughts, when we only choose to see the bad things or the lack of things out in the world, we begin to hunch over a little bit, don't we? We don't tend to walk as straight up as we did before. We begin to look at the ground and our feet. It literally shapes our bodies. And it begins to make us feeble and not able to do and see things the way God is working in the world. And so these thoughts literally shape our identities. Our very bodies get morphed and deformed by how we choose to believe, how we choose to see. Now, I want you all to participate in a little example with me. As you can see up on screen, there is a circle. Okay? Now, can anyone raise their hand and tell me what you see within the outer circle? I mean, this is a simple question, right? Another circle? What color is it? It's black to you. Okay. What's inside the circle? A dot. Thank you, buddy. You got it right. That is the right answer. Thank you. Okay, the black dot, right? I mean, that's obvious. That is what is within the circle. And that is the right answer because that is what 95% of all people will look inside of there and say, there is a black dot, a black circle inside of that other circle. But what else is within that circle? More so than the small black dot, there is a, what, Fred? Open white space. There is more inside of that circle than just the small black dot, right? But our perspective as human beings tends to focus on the small black dots in our lives. We do it all of the time instead of seeing the wide, open beauty of space that God is opening up in our world. God's blessings are literally all around, but most often, rather than seeing those things, we choose to see and focus on the one negative thing in the entire circle of our circumstances. You do it. I do it. I'll probably do it this afternoon. You'll probably do it tomorrow. But this is how we tend to see the world. And Jesus' words, as revolutionary as they were as they are in our world, Jesus was doing this same thing right here to the people of his day. He was looking at people and saying, you're only seeing the black dot. Look at all of the things God has brought into your world. Look at all of the blessings and goodness that exist. Now I want to share a pop culture example with you. Most of us, I believe, are familiar with the story of Star Wars and the dreaded enemy, Darth Vader. Okay? Now, Darth Vader, in the movies that arrived in the late 70s, early 80s, I mean, this is a menacing villain. Seemingly almost unstoppable, except for Luke Skywalker, who comes on scene. But then, during the late 90s and early 2000s, George Lucas decided to make the prequels, the backstory to Star Wars. And we meet little Anakin Skywalker. And he is a little kid. And all of the Jedis, or some of the Jedis, begin to believe that little Annie has the power to balance out the Force. That this is the prophesied child who will make the whole universe right. And so Annie goes into training and eventually becomes Anakin Skywalker. And he has so much promise and so many great things that can happen in his life and in his world. But negative things happen, just like they happen to us, just like they happen in everyone's life. Painful, suffering, anxiety, hurt, all those things that tend to hit us every year, every decade. And so little Anakin Skywalker, as he's becoming this Jedi Knight, has these things. And the Jedi Masters are looking at him saying, let the Force be with you. Let it shape you. Do not look at all of the evil. Do not look at the negative things of life. See the good. But Anakin begins to choose. Choose to believe the negative. Choose to see the dark side of things. Begins to choose literally the dark side of the Force. And it literally begins to affect him in his heart, in his relationships with all the people in his life, and eventually even his body. His appearance literally begins to change on screen in front of us. And one day he becomes Darth Vader, the man behind the mask, the man in the dark cape, the man who will then go on and torture the entire galaxy and put that galaxy under tyranny. It's a pop culture example, but it is so true to what happens in our lives. We start out with so much promise. We start out seeing the world and all of its goodness and amazing things in our lives. Most children look around in wonder and belief and hope. And as those painful experiences hit us, each one gives us a choice. Will we allow that to turn us towards the dark side? Or will we look at it and say, yes, that is a black dot, but there's so much goodness all around it. There is so much God reality, God provision all around. How will we choose to look and see? Will we walk out at sunset? Will we get up in the morning and see the sun rise? Will we go and look at the beauty of God's creation all around? Will we choose to interact with the child? Will we choose to be with people who are not in the best situations, but be by their side and look in their eyes and say, God is right here in front of me. That God is literally all around all of the time if we choose to look, choose to believe that God is there, choose to see the goodness. Jesus challenges our hoarding mentality and the way that we have all kinds of worry and anxiety about our stuff, about our lives, about our appearance, about our status. In this scripture text, Jesus challenges all of those things that we as human society tend to anchor our identity in and says, relax. And literally in that scripture text, Jesus said, relax. Don't be so worried about getting. Know that God's giving has come. Don't worry. Be happy. Bob Marley, wow, genius. Okay? Seriously, Jesus' words to us is, don't worry, be happy, because God has arrived. God is here. God is working all around. And even in the worst circumstances, just look up. Take a look around. And you will find happiness in the world. You will find goodness in the world. You might not always be able to experience it, but you may be able to see it and go, that will be my life in days hereafter. I can accept God's reality into these painful circumstances. It's about how we choose to see, how we choose to live. Will we let up those window shades on our lives and let the light flow in? Let God's goodness and love and grace encounter our day, bombard our day. Just as when you lift those shades and open those blinds, light rushes into our houses in the morning. And when we do that, we all have that at least 1 second moment where we feel a little bit better, where the dark and the night and the day before is gone and a new day has come. Jesus reminds us God's alternative way of seeing the world, that God's reality is here. God's provisions are all around. We just have to choose to see it and awaken to a whole new way of living life.